Hey everybody, we are officially live. I'm so excited to kick off another pre-symposium panel as we dive in on the topic, how to maximize our team's potential. So this pre-symposium panel is a lead up to our executive symposium on October 17th in Houston on the topic, how to maximize our team's potential. So if you've never been to an executive symposium before, what it is a group of leaders coming together to work through their challenges, discuss a pertinent and relevant leadership challenge that they're facing, and strategies to overcome those challenges, and just create a safe place to be vulnerable, to be open, to share about the things that they're going through. And as we lead up to our executive symposiums, we bring attendees of the event together to talk about their thoughts on the topic itself. So we've got three great guest panelists with us here today. We've got Lisa, we got Thomas, we've got Katrina. Thank you all for being here. Lisa, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Lisa Rogers, and I am a CIO for mid-sized healthcare companies.
Very nice. Thomas, how about yourself?
Yeah, Thomas Gilman. I'm the owner of Driving Business Growth, and I help businesses grow, as the name implies.
Very nice. And then Katrina, how about yourself?
Yes, I'm Katrina Jones. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion and HR/talent executive. I run my own consulting company, Advancing Equity plus Inclusion.
Very cool. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision's a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality. And when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways we build community is through our executive symposiums. So let's dive into the topic, how to maximize our team's potential. So one thing that I'm seeing a lot right now is we've got a lot of companies initiating RIFs, reductions in forces, layoffs. Essentially, the job market is really fascinating right now. And I feel that there's, maybe there was a gluttonous point in 2021 where companies were hiring like gangbusters, and they were just trying to fill seats however they possibly could. And now it's almost totally flip-flopped to an employer's market. And, these wide-scale Band-Aid rip-off moments of saying, hey, we're just going to lay off this entire team or this entire organizational unit or this entire department, I believe is not properly maximizing the potential of the people that we have on this team. Like, sure, there might be some people that are just inefficient, not as great in their roles. Maybe we had an idea for them or an ideal for what they could do for our organization, and just for whatever reason hasn't worked out. But I think for a lot of people that get rolled up and caught up in some of these reductions in forces are really talented people, but they're not being leveraged properly. And so what I'd be curious, just as like an initial kickoff question, what do you think companies can do to start to maximize their team's potential and really understand individuals on an individual basis to identify like, hey, here's a really talented person that we really want to keep. And maybe this department we don't see as the future for our business moving forward, but we see this person as a really excellent person to be in our company and as a cultural fit for our company, but maybe in a different department. How can companies be more intentional about tapping into individuals' potentials versus just making wide-scale roll-offs and layoffs for their people and teams?
Yeah. Garrett, that's a great question. And there are a couple of things that come to mind. And, as you talked about it, it really is understanding your talent, understanding people, understanding the talent and capabilities that they have, because often those capabilities and skills are transferable. If you are excellent at project management, you can do that certainly within finance, but you could also do that in another part of the business, let's say on the technology team. So companies really have to, do, I would say, a better job or invest more in assessing talent, understanding what people are really good at, what they're great at, and also what they're interested in doing and what they're open to. Internal mobility, I think on average within most companies is around 35% in terms of employees being hired internally for different roles. But there's really a huge opportunity for companies to look more holistically and to think more holistically about, their talent, how they leverage their talent, and also how they offer opportunities for people to move around the business, not just upward, but sideways, trying out different areas and different roles.
Oh, I like that. Thomas, how about you? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's in large companies at least, it's a lot of effort to get to the knowledge of your employees the way Katrina had advised. And I agree with Katrina, it'd be great if you knew people down at that level and they had the ability to move around. But sometimes, if they have to cut 1,000 people by next week, they don't have the time or the systems in place. So I would say, build systems that allow you to make these decisions because they're coming. So, people kind of run their business. Oh my gosh, we need to cut a bunch of people. They just cut the whole department. That's not the optimum way to run things, either from a people standpoint or from a profitability standpoint. So yeah, set up the systems, get to know your folks, and take the best of them and redeploy them.
Lisa, how about you?
Well, being in IT, for me, it's about really understanding the people and what their passions are and what they really want in their careers. IT changes every 5 years. And if you aren't training your people and keeping them up to date with the latest technologies, they are going to go somewhere else to get that training because they can't stagnate. You stay in a company with no training for long enough and you become unemployable. So for me, I'm always looking at where do you want to go? What's your interest in IT? What are your passions? And then trying to make sure that I can match that to what the company needs. And so when you start having layoffs, if I've got somebody, if I'm heavy in one area, but need somebody, networking, then maybe, I can promote somebody over to networking if they've gotten the proper training to do that. So for me, it's about seeing where the company's going, what are their needs going to be, and then as much as possible, upskilling my team to be able to do that. And, but sometimes, like you said, sometimes that's not where their interest lies. It's not what they want to do. And, they'll self-select and move on. But yeah, I'm always evaluating where we're going, what are our future needs going to be, and making sure I train people so that they can upskill to those jobs.
All of you have made such good points. I'm really excited. Like all three, I've got like individual things that I want to like jump in on. Thomas, I'm going to jump into yours first because I'm super fascinated by this concept of we need to cut 1,000 roles by next week. Like we're just going to make it happen. The question I have is like, what is this even? How could this happen? How do we not have a stopgap? How is there not a lever? Like in every sink in a bathroom, in like think about your home, if you put the little plunger down, you fill the water all the way up. There's like a follow-up valve where the water to go through to like pour in. God forbid you fill it up that high because you don't want the water rolling onto the floor. Why do not companies have this like stop valve to be like, uh-oh, we're in a not so comfortable situation. We might have to rectify some things over the next 6 to 8 months, not next week. Like, is it wishful thinking? Is it lack of preparation? Is it hope and a prayer? Like, how can companies be so just like, how can this be happening? I guess is what I'm asking.
Right. And how can it be happening ever since businesses started? You'd think they'd learn. It happens once, sure. But 3 years later, when it happens again, it's like, don't you remember? So yeah, I would say the causes are focus, for a lot of leaders is not on their human development. So they are working to build more widgets or cut their costs or whatever. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is business leaders tend to be optimistic and they will put off a hard decision like that till it's too late. The other thing is they don't look at the big picture. And I think, Lisa had some great points where you can see this coming if you look for it, but they don't. They're too busy in the business a lot of times. But what really gets me is that it happens cyclical, over and over for my whole lifetime. And I was like, yeah, we did this 3 years ago. This is so familiar. And I don't know how to, if I knew how to fix it, I'd probably love to tell people. But the people under the large management that is making that decision, they see it coming and somehow they can't influence the people above them to make that more advanced view of how to deal with their people, in a term that you're trying not to do that.
Do you think it's a product of like suppression or a lack of psychological safety? Like, how can it's still crazy because to your point, it happens over and over and over again. And Lisa, Katrina, I want to learn your thoughts on this,
Yeah.
but it's just so wild to me. How can we not have the foresight to be able to say, like, okay, cool, like this is an experiment we're going to run. We're going to hire these 1,000 people. We're going to put them in this position. And our belief is that this is going to help us reduce our costs by XYZ amount or increase our revenue by XYZ amount. And ultimately, our profitability by XYZ date and time is going to be here. And if it's not at that point, we're going to have to look at making some adjustments gradually over time. But like, why is there a lack of an experimental approach when it comes to these decisions? It's just wide scale, we're doing it, no clear cutoff or evaluation point. And then all of a sudden you get to some point where you're like, oh my God, we're hemorrhaging cash. What the heck is going on here? We got to wide scale, just rip the Band-Aid off and end it. And I don't know. It seems like almost there's a lack of leadership around the actual experiment itself. Where does the accountability fall?
The accountability ultimately falls on leadership, but somehow they are also insulated, right, from the consequences as well. This has been a big topic of conversation with the many tech layoffs in tech. How could these companies not have predicted this? And I think some of this is also inherently tied to your company values. Do you have a value and a belief system around how you align your resources to your goals and desired output? If you have a value or a philosophy that says, we operate in a lean manner, right? And we align our staffing in that way. So we're never over hiring and looking at the short term and saying, oh, we're going to hire a bunch of people because we're going to deliver and this is going to happen. We're always aligning our resources in a lean fashion so that we can meet our goals, meet our output, and thinking about the long-term view. And what Thomas, spoke to so well is that short-term view. I'm just looking at the next quarter, looking at, the shareholder meeting in that next quarter, and I'm not thinking about that year ahead and the possibilities that might exist there.
Do you think it's like oh yeah, Lisa, jump in.
I was going to just say from my perspective, first of all, I don't work for companies where you lay off 1,000 people. That would be the whole company. But they see, especially in healthcare doesn't understand they're in the IT business. They think they're in the people business. They care for people and they really undervalue IT. And so it's a commodity. Things go well, we hire IT people. Things don't go well, we get rid of IT people. That's okay. We can hire them back again, a different group. And they don't really appreciate the value of the consistency, the tribal knowledge, all the things that come with having longer term employees. It becomes a commodity to them, and they don't really, they're not people, right? They just hire them when they need them, they fire them when they don't need them. And so that's how it happens, at least in a mid-sized healthcare company. I mean, I won't globalize that to all the companies, but I've seen that over and over and over again in my career.
Katrina, you brought up this point of like short-term mindset for a lot of these leaders and just maybe like a lack of awareness. Do you think it's an emperor with no clothes situation where the direct reports of these leaders and the executive team aren't pushing it up because they're like, don't tell me any bad news, I don't want to hear it? Or is it a product of they know, but they're just like, honestly, in a year and a half from now, from when we actually face the ramifications of decisions, I don't know if I'm actually going to be at this company anymore. So therefore, I don't actually know if I want to deal with it.
I don't think it's that either. I don't think it's either of the things that you named necessarily. And I don't think it can be summed up as it's these three things. I think part of it is, for publicly traded companies, it's that shareholder pressure, right? Shareholders do not like to hear bad news. And that doesn't, bode well for your company if you've got to deliver that bad news. And there's risk in that. And I think in general, there is an optimism, but there is also that short-term view. And, leadership are not thinking again about that 12-month view. And even if they are, they may still have a really optimistic view of what it looks like 12 months from now. Not thinking about all the potential risks, and also going through maybe a continuous exercise where you're continuously evaluating. And that's probably what is really missing, is we're not continuously evaluating and looking at those signals that say, hey, this has been going really well, but this is happening over here. We're losing some steam on, in this part of the economy, and it will eventually affect us. And so let's start to adjust now. And maybe, I think that is part of it, making those smaller adjustments, incremental adjustments, versus these huge, 1,000 people plus layoffs or other, earth-shaking moves.
I agree. I think it really comes down to a concept of like transparency and experimentation.
Yeah.
Because I think if we can come in, because like you mentioned before, like, if companies can stay lean and only hire what's necessary, you might miss out on some opportunities for growth.
Yeah.
Like, I don't actually have an issue with hiring a bunch of people as long as you're transparent. As like, hey, over the next 9 months, we've got enough cash allocated for all these people that we've hired, but this is what we need to see as a success result. If we're not able to see that, we might have to make some adjustments as to what this role looks like moving forward. I think a lot of companies fear being that transparent, because if they are that transparent, they're like, well, why the heck would anybody want to take that job? They might feel like their job's in jeopardy over the next 9 months. But it's like, their job's in jeopardy in the next 9 months. You might as well let them know that their job's in jeopardy in the next 9 months, that this is an experimental approach and what the success looks like. Maybe they might be willing to put in a few extra later nights and early mornings to make sure they hit the results they need to hit. Whereas if you don't tell them the results they need to hit, and you don't tell them the timeline for when you're going to be pulling the plug on this or reevaluating this experiment, you leave everybody in the lurch and in the blind spot. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, y'all, we're making a big change here. We're going to rip off this Band-Aid.
Yeah, you're talking about putting checks and balances, in an experiment or in an investment that a company is making. And immediately I think about all these tech companies that are making massive investments into AI. And the big question is, when does that pay off? What does that payoff look like? And having that transparency around this is the timeline. This is how long we are going to, burn cash because we're pouring into AI. And at, let's say, XYZ timeline, this is when we're going to pull back, or this is when, if we don't see certain results or certain outcomes, we will adjust. I think having that transparency would be really empowering for employees, and I think more broadly, across the industry for others.
Yeah.
Thomas, Lisa, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I'm going to downgrade the 1,000 layoff just to include mid-sized companies, say 100, right? That's still a huge amount of suffering for those people that maybe didn't expect it. Two things. So let's say the company's doing great. They're building their AI structure, and that's a great example because we're going through something that is very much like previous cycles. So, we're going to hire 100 AI software and IO and every other aspect of AI. Well, so maybe they overhire by 100. That would be one reason to lay off 100. If you had hired just what you needed, you wouldn't have to lay off 100. Okay, so how do we get around that? Because we almost always overhire when things are great. Well, let's do contractors. We'll do, 10 employees and 90 contractors. Well, what happens is management figures out that contractors are cheaper. Now what's their decision? Do they lay off contractors that are cheaper, or what do they do? Now they're in a bind. So they've tried things to get out of this, but it always happens. They haven't figured it out. So that's why we go through these cycles.
Well, and especially with like AI, especially in like software development, I feel like there can also be transparency around the experiment if it's a success. Because if it's a success for software development, we don't need as many software developers. Like, we don't need to outsource to people, whether it be across the world or domestically. Like, we got the AI to do it. We've got one person who's managing it, which means that if you're a software developer for these organizations, like there's a big cloud of unknown of what's coming down the pipe of like my future. So as a company, you could say, hey, you know what? You may not be a software developer long term doing this specific type of work, but there are skills that you possess that can be applied to other elements of the organization, which leads to Katrina's first point around understanding the talent in people. So Katrina, you brought up this point, and me paraphrasing is this concept of skills versus innate abilities. Like, I don't think you can teach someone to be passionate about the company's culture and what we're trying to do as like a mission of an organization. But you can teach a skill. You can teach someone how to go from, let's say, a software developer to be maybe a product manager, interacting with customers, understanding what their needs are, and be able to create technical ideas or solutions based on whatever those technical needs are. I'm just making one up in the sky. So I guess what I'd be curious to know, what can companies do to be better at evaluating the skills versus innate abilities conversation, or like the things that are teachable versus the things that are just not teachable?
This is a great question. And, honestly, when you asked it, I was thinking about and framed it up, I was thinking about what Lisa shared about, reskilling, upskilling, that you're constantly thinking about what are the new technologies, what are the emerging technologies that are, on the horizon, and how can I or how can we train our staff, our team members, so that they're equipped for these new technologies that are, going to be it in a few years. I'm pausing here because it can get dangerous when you talk about innate abilities, things that are quote unquote natural versus things that aren't natural, because we can all, for most folks, we can stretch in some areas that are perhaps not our favorite, or not, areas that we are highly skilled at. But the question is, for how long, right? At some point, that stretching is overwhelming, and may cause a breakdown for us, and certainly for the, projects or initiatives that we work on. But, it is about understanding folks' passions, and continuously like checking on that, right? Because I might come in and say, I'm really passionate about this, but then I get exposed to some new area. I get exposed to some new part of the business, and all of a sudden I have a new passion, right? So managers can and should have continuous conversations with their employees about what their interests are, what they love to do, and also what they don't like to do. So that's one of the ways that you can find out what is maybe not innate for people, or what they're not, called to. And, then you can present some opportunities where perhaps people can upskill in certain areas. So if there's a growth opportunity for me, let's say in project management, I can lean into that and say, I want to get better at this. I am of the mind and of the philosophy that there is a limit to that, right? I'm never going to be a calculus goddess. It just, it does not exist in this lifetime. But there are and so rather than invest more in, well, I'm going to keep working, I'm going to keep training, I'm going to keep learning, why don't I take that energy and time and invest in another area that, yes, I am interested in, passionate about, is also beneficial to the business, and that I can really excel and grow in. So I think to answer your original question, it is about those continuous conversations, really understanding from people, letting folks self-report, here's what I'm, great at, here's what I'm passionate about. You can also certainly assess people through other methods. There are lots of assessments out there to assess soft skills as well as hard skills, technical skills, and then working with people to grow in those areas that they want to grow in, and that are also, I think, advantageous for the company and for their career.
I would like to add something that I thought of when you were talking. 9 out of 10 of my younger employees want to go into security because they hear there are lots of jobs in security, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality of security is really bad. And it's got really high turnover, really high burnout rate, because you start off just looking at a monitor, trying to investigate threats, all day, every day. And so it's interesting when I have these conversations with them because they're passionate. They want to do security. They're really passionate about security until they get a taste of it. And then they go, well, maybe not so much so. And then they start looking at other things. So I appreciated what you said there about, their passions may change. But it sort of amuses me every time they say, well, I said, where do you want to go in IT? What are your passions? What are your goals? They go, well, we want to go into security. And I'm just kind of, yes, okay.
Yeah, I would think that too. It's what I hear all the time. Cybersecurity is a job market.
Yeah.
Lots of job opportunities. It's always, or for the immediate future, it's going to be a hot, job.
But at that lower, at the entry level of cybersecurity, it's a very high burnout rate. Very high burnout rate.
Yeah.
Once you can get past that, if you can stick with it, kind of get into higher levels and everything where you're doing more of a management of it or supervising rather than just staring at a monitor all day, every day, then it can get more interesting, but it's getting past that entry point.
Yeah. That's why exposure is so important, because you wouldn't know that when you're sitting outside, but you have and get some exposure to a certain function or a certain role or certain area, and then you can decide, is this something I want to go deeper into, or no thank you, we're done here.
We're done here, right?
So one of the things that Katrina brings up is, as you're going through a boom hiring people, you're probably not growing your HR staff or your systems to handle all these extra people. And so that it starts to get less clear kind of what these extra 100 people are doing, what is their flexibility. And so you get a little fuzzy on the people that you've hired during this boom. So then when the cutbacks are thought of, you don't have that clear picture that she so rightly said you need to react better than people do. And now you have no time to implement that. So if they could think about the capacity of knowing your employees as they grow, that would really avoid some of the problems. But nobody ever does. You're too busy growing, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of too busy growing, Lisa, you brought up this point of just having an active growth mindset. Like after training is critical, how to stay on top of the next big thing. You mentioned IT changes every 5 years. How do you go? I think there are a couple challenges that exist within that realm of, one, the inherent desire not to change, because change is hard and uncomfortable and inherently just like different from what I've been doing or what I'm comfortable with. So therefore, the status quo is really comfortable and I don't want to change it. And then two, companies, when they're not necessarily in a gangbusters growing mode, saying, I don't have the budget to spend for you to go to this new training. And it's like, well, do you have the budget to spend for this cybersecurity risk to be at bay? Because ultimately paying for me to go through this training is going to hopefully mitigate the tens of thousands of dollars we may have to spend if we end up getting hacked or we end up having somebody breach our system. So how would you like to spend it? A couple thousands here to have me trained and prepared, or tens of thousands later? And like, well, later may never come. So,
Well, I do IT, I do CIO and CISO, right?
Yeah,
So
sure.
half my hat is security, and security is a hard sell. I mean, and change management is huge. Nobody likes multi-factor authentication. Everybody hates it. I hate it, but it's a fact of life today. You have to do it. And so trying to get people to change, who've been stuck in a way of doing things, is probably the biggest challenge I have, is getting them to do those changes. And you do have to monetize it. Now, the CIO side of me is trying to do business enablement, and I'm implementing technologies that help the business succeed and really let the business drive it. This AI thing is driving me crazy. I read these job descriptions that are like, we need an AI person to come in and implement AI in our company and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going, what's the use case? Don't start with AI and then hire a bunch of, to your point, Thomas, hire a bunch of AI people when you have no idea what your use case for AI is. Tell me what you need as a business. And if AI can be deployed to help you there, great. But it might not be. That may not be the best solution for you to implement this thing. So I can see a lot of AI people being laid off in the future because people are just going crazy and they're asking the wrong question. But from a security side, it's a standard risk assessment, right? It's how what's the risk of something happening? What's the probability? What's the cost to the business if it does happen? It's not in the tens of thousands, it's in the hundreds of thousands, even for small businesses. And then how much am I willing to spend to mitigate that? It's just a mathematical formula. And so you're going to spend the money. When I started my last job, they had a proprietary software system that was being housed by the developers on bare metal servers, and a virtual Windows firewall that had no concept of securing it. And I said, so what happens to the business if we come in tomorrow and this whole system's bricked and so are the backups? What happens to the business? And they went, now we're probably out of business. And I said, so how much is it worth you to protect it? How much are you willing to spend to protect it? And so I spent less than that, by the way, but I did spend. I mean, it wasn't nothing. So, you just have to, at least in IT, do an evaluation of the risk and you spend the appropriate level of money to mitigate. You don't spend $10,000 or $100,000 to protect a $10,000 asset, but you might want to spend $10,000 to secure a $100,000 asset.
The thing that keeps being brought up over and over again is this concept of like a blatant lack of foresight on executive leadership to identify what might come down in the future, whether it be potentially a layoff, maybe we overhired, maybe we don't have ourselves securely protected from cybersecurity risks, whatever it may be. What can leaders do? What can executives do? What can CEOs do to be better equipped for this on a regular basis? Because no one's planning. Like Thomas, you brought up HR. It's like when companies grow, they're not adding HR headcount to help with that. They're just kind of in grow mode because they look at security, they look at HR, they look at sometimes even finance. It's just like a cost center. It's like, this costs me money. This does not directly bring me in money, but oh my gosh, am I grateful I got it when I need it? The question I'm asking is, how can we better analyze what our level of preparation needs to be and our level of understanding of the future needs to be, so then we are prepared? Because to your point, Lisa, you don't want to spend $100,000 in training for $10,000 of an asset. That's way overkill. Doesn't make any sense. But is there something we can do to suggest to these executives as they weigh these decisions as to how much to invest in these sorts of things?
Yeah, I think Katrina's concept of understanding how people work and the culture of the business are important. So which leaders get promoted? Are they the ones that are cautious on hiring, or are they the ones that are cheerleaders and go get them and, let's burn the boats, let's go in this direction? So if you have a culture like that and that's the leaders you promote, you're going to get this. This is what the result of what you're promoting. And so I think the board even should start to think about, okay, what kind of leaders do we want? Do we want more prudent, thoughtful leaders, or do we want these go get them, growth at all costs kind of folks? So I would say that's something that I don't know any company that's thinking about that.
I just want to build on what Thomas is saying, because the CEO, the person in that top seat, has significant influence on what's rewarded within the company, and that culture and philosophy around growth. And do we grow fast? Do we invest heavily, or are we more measured? And I think we've all seen this, where a CEO gets hired and then all of a sudden, the company is doing all the things, or, spending all this money and investing in some different areas. And having, again, those foundational values and philosophies that you anchor to can keep leadership and executive teams from, going in whatever direction a new CEO goes in.
Nice.
And yeah, I agree that it starts with the culture of the company, right? How does the company value people? You know, if you real, I knew one company that had put very high value on their people, and they hardly ever had layoffs because once you got hired, they made a huge commitment to you. Other companies, it's like I said, it's a commodity. I hire them when I need them. I fire them when I don't need them. I always remember a guy I said to me once, he worked in oil and gas. And obviously here in Houston, oil and gas is very cyclical. And people are hired and fired and hired and fired all day long. And he said, we're paid more. But the mistake people make is you're paid more because you're going to spend times unemployed. And they're not putting that extra pay away for when they're, when they are. They're spending it. And then when they get laid off, then they're in hardship because I always save that money, whatever the differential is between what this role would normally be and I'm being paid, I put that aside because I know there are going to be times I'm laid off. So, with oil and gas here in Houston, it is cyclical and it's somewhat out of not completely out of, but somewhat out of the control of the companies. The price, it's just based on the price of oil, right? And so they hire and fire. So it depends on the culture of the company from the top and how they value their people. Are they assets or are they commodities?
That's an interesting use case. That's like the classic NFL dilemma. I'm making $7 million a year. This is great. I can live like a king. And then all of a sudden they retire and they're like, oh crap, I'm not making any more money. What happened to all my money?
Very short career life.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, cool. Maybe I need to reevaluate that. But Thomas, you bring up this great point of achieving balance. And this is totally related to, I would believe and imagine a lot of the work, Katrina, that you do. Because Thomas, you bring up this point of like, who are the people that we're promoting? Who are the people that we're hiring? Are they the, very optimistic, but maybe, separated from reality kind of people? Or are they the very conservative, or, by the book, hey, we need to make sure that everything, all of our, ducks are in a row before we even consider even thinking of doing anything outside of our norm. It's like, where does that balance actually lie? And I think for a lot of companies, a lot of CEOs, a lot of just organizations in general, anybody who's in a management hiring decision, we often hire people like us. And so one of the biggest challenges I see with a lot of organizations, and I would imagine, Katrina, that you do a lot with your DEI work is, hey, there's this unconscious bias of like, hey, you sound like me, you got a similar mentality about growth as me, I'm going to hire you. You seem like a good person to hire. So I see a lot of me in you. So therefore I want you to be on our team. And that ultimately does not achieve the sort of balance that, Thomas, you're prescribing of like, hey, we got to have some people that are active go-getters, that are very optimistic, that are trying to reach, for the next level. But we also have to have some people that are conservative, that understand like, hey, we got to keep the business intact, because we don't have those people and their voices are not the same in terms of weight within our organization, we will potentially make mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's great. The other thing is you could do a financial study, purely financial, of which is better, grow quickly and then lay off when you have to, or be slow and steady. My thought is the high growth model probably makes more money. The thing that it doesn't, it leads the people behind. And so you're not going to be able in the long term to attract as many people as the company that Lisa mentioned, where they make a big commitment. So it's kind of like a social contract. Is the company going to, take care of you as much as they can, or are you just a commodity? And so that's what, as people are trying to get jobs, and in this environment, they probably take the job that opens. It's not like you have a choice between one or the other. And a lot of times what you say is true. People that are promoted within the company are like the leaders that are already there. So it's self-perpetuating. And how do we break that? That's a good question.
I heard of a company once that won't take inside referrals for jobs. Normally that's where people go first, right? Is if somebody knows somebody, they're considered low risk and do it. This company won't take inside referrals because they feel that it just ends up hiring people like them.
Nice.
It perpetuates that by having inside referrals. Oh, I have a friend who well, you don't get that same spread that you would normally get.
But I think one of the most blatant things that, I had a long career in the corporate world, and one of the first meetings I looked around and there was a whole bunch of older white guys, and I thought, man, by the time I retire, this is going to be different. And in some of the last meetings, I looked around the room and like it was a little bit better, but in 40 years, they didn't make that much improvement. And I'm like, that's how ingrained what happens is, and there's got to be a real effort to change what's going on.
Yeah. You have to make a conscientious effort. Like one of the exercises as part of a larger leadership team exploration that I often do with executive teams, leadership teams, is thinking about what's missing within that leadership team. What capabilities or attributes, skills, and styles and things like that, because you often, do find that some executive teams are kind of in a groupthink and people are showing up in the same way, behaving in the same way. And you really have to make a conscientious and intentional choice, both to think about what's missing here, what styles and what types dominate. Even thinking about, identity from a visible identity perspective. If we're, a table full of 12 white men, we are missing some perspectives. And we likely, as 12 white men, have some commonalities around education, et cetera, that narrow our perspective. And being intentional and thinking about, what perspectives are we missing? What are we missing on our team that would be additive to us? Is critical. That's how you shift, and that's how you can build these teams that are more representative of our world.
It's one thing to look at diversity and hire diversity, but then you've got to live with it.
Yes.
I mean, I come in as a female and in technology, and they go, "Oh, great, we're being diverse, right?" But then I think differently,
Yes.
And they don't like the fact that I think differently. So they like the idea of it, but then they don't like the reality of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you've got to really open up to both, bring in that viewpoint that you don't normally have, bring that in, but then embrace it when it's inside and say, okay, so she doesn't think like I do. And maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah. Encouraging.
Different. Yeah.
No, I like it. Great pre-symposium, y'all. This has been a really interesting panel. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation today. I thank you all for being here and for sharing your insights and wisdom. And for anybody watching this, thank you all for being here. If you want to meet these three great leaders, come to our executive symposium on October 17th in Houston. Topic is how to maximize our team's potential. I hope to see you all there. I'll post in the comments of this video how to RSVP for the event. But anyways, thank you all for your time. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to seeing you all in a month.